Chapter 2. Departure. When the Armenian-Azerbaijani War for Karabakh began in 2020, I watched a news report on TV about Armenian residents burning their homes to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. As I watched this report, I thought how painful it must be to destroy your home where you have lived your entire life and then leave it behind. At the time, I didn't think that just a few months later, I would find myself in a similar situation to the characters in that report, except that I didn't destroy my own home but I still had to leave it. Either to put up with the Russian world and accept it as a given, or to go home. I made the decision to leave. Of course, my parents were still at home, and I couldn't just leave them, so someone had to stay, either my older brother or me. We talked, and he decided to stay. Now I was at ease for my parents, knowing that he would help them and take care of them if needed. My mother had difficulty walking, but my father held up well. So, my brother stayed behind, and I, along with my two cousins, decided to leave at the same time. My younger cousin will return in 2 years, as he loves Russia more than I do. However, he was inspired by our enthusiasm and decided to escape from familiar surroundings. In fact, he just needed some kind of emotional boost after everything that had happened to us. And now the time has come, we are going to leave. First, we needed money to contact our friends abroad and at the same time draw up a rough plan for our departure. Fortunately, there was money, but it wasn't enough, more had to be obtained. Native Mariupol was destroyed completely, there were simply no working ATMs where you could withdraw cash, there was no electricity, and there was nothing that could connect us to Ukraine's banking infrastructure to cash out our funds. So I first had to get to the Hranin village, and then to Novozovsk. Hranin is a village in the Donetsk region. It is very beautiful, picturesque, and cozy. I remember that I liked it very much, even though in some places it resembled the frozen 1970s, with old houses and dilapidated streets. But still an attractive village. There my brother and I managed to connect to the internet and contact some of our acquaintances. It was then that I wrote for the first time, at that time still not familiar to me, a guy from Holland, asking him to host us with my brother in case of arrival, and received his approval response, which I learned about it already at the next connection. The brother contacted his girlfriend and also agreed on something with her. She was from Toretsk, which is in the Donetsk region. The cities where we grew up, Mariupol and Toretsk, no longer exist. In their place, new cities are being built. New ones, or nothing, and they already have their own lives and other people. In Hranin village, we managed to withdraw a certain amount from a local ATM, but not too much. Besides us, there were a huge number of people doing the same thing, all of them waiting to get their money. That day, my brother's grandmother, who had brought us to the village, even managed to arrange accommodation with a local woman in exchange for us repairing the roof of her old house by replacing some of the broken slate with new slate. It was no trouble for us, on the contrary, it was a pleasure, because it's nice to help other people. Her neighbor was with us, and he kept saying, "Give me some money, give me some money." He needed money for a bottle, because he was really thirsty. So she gave him some money. Happy and satisfied, he went home, had a drink, and then started yelling at his wife and daughter so that the whole street could hear him. About half an hour later, the neighbor across the street started yelling at her husband. I remember sitting outside with my cousin on a bench that evening, listening to the bickering in the houses. Later, everything fell silent and peace came. Well, what else can the inhabitants of remote villages do, except for quarreling and drinking? Typical problems of the hinterland. And this was also what stopped me and my brother, because we both understood that we were going to face the same thing, an unstoppable drinking spree, because how could there be anything else when everyone around you was drinking, and the place itself was so corrupt? It was like a whirlwind, a whirlpool that sucked you in. I didn't want to get drunk and sit on a bench, waiting for a mythical better life, because it wouldn't happen. I didn't want to participate in Putin's liberation campaigns and his gangster company against common sense. Happy and satisfied, he went home, had a drink, and then started yelling at his wife and daughter so that the whole street could hear him. Staying in a decaying world was dangerous from all sides, no matter how you looked at it. Only alcohol could save her from despair. And it was in the atmosphere, it screamed about itself. We spent the night with that woman in her second home, which she kindly provided for us. Inside, the house seemed almost untouched for the past 25 to 30 years, as if it had been abandoned long ago and no one had visited it in all that time. The house had an old-world charm reminiscent of the Soviet era. However, what did it matter to us? Personally, I enjoyed both the exterior and the interior of the house. The next day, we were able to withdraw money again, as there were restrictions on withdrawing a certain amount per day, so we had to do the operation twice, and then we returned home. I remember well passing through various villages and beautiful fields around, in places disfigured by burnt-out vehicles and craters from shells and bombs. Concrete blocks and anti-tank hedgehogs were found here and there on the roads, and, of course, beloved, patrols checking documents. The patrols varied, from kind to cruel, young boys and grown men. Good, we had no special. I managed to drive through without any problems, although some of the soldiers asked me if I had already passed the filtration or not. We said we would leave soon, although it was clear that in the near future we would not be allowed to leave the city without this damned filtration. The entire city was surrounded by artillery batteries, which were located everywhere, and it became clear how accurately the city was being targeted and how obvious it was to the military where they were shooting. They were well aware that they were shooting at civilians and their homes, not at military targets. And the realization of this fact pounded in my head again, like a metal hammer. Hey, wake up. We have to leave from here. The men in uniform didn't care that their actions were causing the deaths of women, old people, children, and men. They had been ordered to kill everything alive. The war showed me how weak-willed and spineless people are, if they are ready to carry out the criminal and vile orders of their bastard commanders. I became disgusted with any army, because an army should protect its people, not exterminate them, but when a ruler is a dictator, his subordinates also become executioners, ready to kill anyone on the first order. And there was a time in my life when, under the influence of propaganda, I believed that Russia was a great country and the Chechen commanders were scoundrels. I'm sorry, but that's how it was. When we returned home from Hraniden, the fighting in Mariupol was almost over, but the cleansing was still going on, and Azovstal was still standing. I remember going back to the city on my bike, but this time I went to a different part of the city. On my way, I met a young girl who was on her way to visit a friend. I passed her, but then stopped and waited for her. We met each other and hurriedly set off for the city on our bicycles, while the shelling continued in the area of Azovstal, which caused part of the left bank of the city to be closed. It was still interesting to ride with her, and she was feeling safer. On the way, we passed a large cemetery, near which there was a candy factory, from which dozens of people were carrying boxes of candy. We continued driving and saw a man crawling along the dirt road a little ahead of us. At first, I thought his legs or part of his torso had been torn off, because I couldn't see his whole body at first, but only part of it due to the grass and upturned earth that hid him from full view. But later he performed a crawling maneuver and appeared completely. It became clear that he was drunk. Our help was useless. The girl and I drove past it and continued on. After a while, when we reached one of the streets that the girl knew well, I said goodbye to her and she continued on her way. I'm going to visit my friend, and I'm going to see the bombed-out left bank. The left bank has suffered a lot. Many places that I loved there, they have been smashed to pieces. There was a patrol on one of the streets in the private sector, and the commander who led it asked me if I knew where the source of drinking water was located, to which I replied that I am not from this area myself. He was indignant and said, "What am I doing here then if I am not from here?" And I didn't give a damn about him at that moment. I didn't respond, I just drove past them without looking back, expecting to get shot in the back. But nothing happened. When I got to Lenin Square, I saw a huge crowd of people in the courtyards. I became curious and turned around to see what was happening there. Rations from the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations were distributed there. There were unrealistically a lot of people, and there were very few rations. A little distance from this place there was also a crowd of people, but there the people were trying to catch Wi-Fi, which somehow miraculously seemed to be distributed from the building of the former supermarket. I remember trying to get on the network, and I think I even managed to get some signal. But that's about it. One thing I can tell you for sure is that I didn't want to spend any time there. I just needed to see what had become of the places I knew, and nothing more. So I remounted my bike and began to ride around the left bank district, moving from street to street and taking in the sights. Weeks earlier, from my home in my native village, I saw shells hitting high-rise buildings on the left bank, visible on the horizon from the window of our house. And now I drive past these badly damaged houses and look at the dozens and the hundreds of residents sitting on their ruins. It looked very tragic and sad. Many grandmothers and grandfathers were sitting there, walking around, and talking. However, I specifically went to the left bank to visit someone, my distant relative and good friend Dmitry. I got to his house from memory and saw that the apartments on the floor of the house where he lived had burned down and turned pitch black. It became clear that he and his wife were not there. To be honest, I didn't expect to see them there, as I had been in contact with Dima by phone until the very last moment, when the city was just beginning to be besieged. From our last conversations, I remember that he moved to another part of the city because the left bank was shelled earlier than most of the part of Mariupol due to its geographical proximity to the advancing front. The lights went out there first and communications were turned off, and shells began to land there first, so Dima and his wife did not delay for long and, saving their lives, went to relatives in the opposite sector of Mariupol, but soon the fighting got there. About Dima's future I didn't know anything at that time, because I no longer had contact with him in those days. Needless to say, the scale of the war was impressive. The city was under siege and subjected to heavy shelling and bombing. People were trying to leave the city as best they could. Fortunately, my family and I managed to avoid entering the city itself, although, as I mentioned earlier, there were repeated offers to do so, as many believed that the city would not be destroyed. However, this was a misconception. I remember when things started to get better in the village school where we were hiding in the basement, they even opened a room where people could go to find their missing loved ones and friends. I wrote to them that I was looking for Dmitry, and I gave them his approximate location at the time of the blockade, but we would later find each other when we escaped from the unfortunate city of Mariupol. Well, I rode through the ruins of the city and returned to my harbor. Before my departure from my native place, there was a week or so left, and on April 26, 2022, when life in my native village had already begun to stabilize a little, shells were not falling on my head, it was possible to buy gas in cylinders and bring water from the spring. When life had more or less stabilized, I and my 2 cousins went to the Bezymennoye village, in the Novozovsk rayon, to pass through the filtration and go beyond the Donbass. My brother Sasha and I were planning to travel outside Russia. But our younger cousin, no. He said that he would go to his sister in another part of Russia, as he did not want to go to Europe, while the 2 of us decided to go to Holland, to my friend, who kindly agreed to take us in for a while. We did not have enough money to go all the way to Holland, so we had a plan B, to borrow money from someone along the way. My cousin's grandmother, together with her partner Sergei, may he rest in peace, took us to Bezymennoye. On the way, we encountered a lot of military equipment and military personnel at checkpoints, but we still arrived without any major problems, although the military asked us a couple of times where our filtration documents were, to which we replied that we were just about to get them. Not all soldiers readily believed this and agreed to let us pass without inspection, although we told them the truth. Nevertheless, we were allowed to pass, thank God. I remember that it was already warm and sunny outside, and the pleasant rays played on our faces, and the warmth caressed our skin. In Bezymennoye, we found ourselves in a car queue, where we were told that if we wanted to go through the filtration process without a car, we didn't need to wait on the highway and could go to a local school, where we would stay until we were taken to the village of Starobeshevo, where we would be filtered in a live queue and then be allowed to go wherever we wanted, home, further into Russia, or even beyond its borders. Of course, we chose Russia as our exit corridor. The screening process involved filling out various questionnaires in which we answered questions about whether we had served in the army, whether we had relatives, friends, or acquaintances in the army or armed forces, in the police, or in the security forces. We also had to give our fingerprints and take a photo, after which we were given a small piece of paper indicating that we had been filtered. With this document, we could leave the territory occupied by the Russians. There was an atmosphere in Bezymennoye. The village itself is beautiful, by the sea, with an alluring sea and picturesque places. It was from there that we saw that Azovstal was also being hit by missiles from the sea. Before that, we didn't know about it. I mean that Azovstal was bombed not only by combat aircraft, so you understand, but also by ships. In addition, it was surrounded on all sides by infantry and artillery and was bombed day and night. I could not understand only one thing then and now: why? Why are they destroying everything? It was easier to keep the plant intact in the blockade and wait for the Azov soldiers to run out of ammunition and provisions, and that's it. Since you've surrounded the city and the factory, why would you want to mutilate it so much? What's the point? Neither my cousin nor I could understand or accept this. However, we couldn't change it, so we had to accept the new reality. In Bezymennoye, we slept on the floor in some former children's classrooms, and we walked around the village a lot. There were stupid volunteers from the United Russia Party and militiamen with red armbands on their arms. They walked around the territory in a choir and proclaimed something there, as if we had entered the communist dimension. It looked as if I had found myself 30 years ago in the past: hymns, slogans, songs, red ribbons, flags. Well, you know what I mean. And volunteers from United Russia helped refugees, added their names to lists, and so on. I remember there was a young Buryat or Yakut, wearing glasses, who looked sinister, like a Japanese professor conducting experiments on people. My brother and I laughed at his outfit. We also laughed at a young volunteer who was a big fan of Russia. He kept inspiring us, saying that soon we would be heading to mainland Russia, where, according to him, real life would begin. It was clear that he was zombified by propaganda. In addition, this patriot boasted that he had previously fought in the Donbass militia and has a combat wound, which is why he can no longer serve on the front. I asked if he had a family, to which he replied in the affirmative. I asked him if he received money from United Russia for his volunteering work, and he replied that he did not. After that, I wondered how he supported his family if he did not receive a salary at this transit camp, but simply worked out of enthusiasm. There's some kind of discrepancy. And this comrade has been buzzing all our ears about the greatness of Russia, and how soon we will live sweetly in its arms. In short, it was better not to have long conversations with people like him, because it was dangerous. What could you talk to him about when 9 people died in a few days from the unbearable heat while waiting in line for filtration? And the difficult conditions of waiting for your turn, because there was no proper infrastructure for elderly and sick people to wait in. Then there was an outbreak of illness due to poor sanitation and the poor quality of water in the barrels they used for drinking. In addition, there were angry soldiers everywhere. In short, it's not a kind children's fairy tale, as he said, but more like a Grimm's fairy tale, dark and heartless. But, fortunately, there was also good news. There was almost always a stable internet connection, and our names were moving up the filtration list, which meant that we would be leaving soon, which was incredibly exciting. I remember one day when the 3 of us went to the beach to sit, and to watch the seagulls and the water, and talk about life. It had been a long time since we had done that. No matter how terrible the war was, it brought us together in those days, giving a powerful boost to our brotherly relations, for which I am grateful in the truest sense of the word. Before that, peaceful life had divided us all by distance, busy schedules, work, and many other factors, but now we were sitting together on the beach, as if nothing had happened, talking about the future, the present, and the past. It was great. I still have those photos from the Azov Sea, where the 3 of us are together, and I love those moments. Moreover, something I didn't think much about at the time, those were the last days when I could see my younger cousin, who would soon separate from us and travel to the far north, while we would go to Europe. My cousin Alexander's goal was Germany, mine was Holland, and the younger one's goal was to stay at home. And each of us ended up where we wanted to be. Finally, after 1 or 2 days, I don't remember exactly, we boarded a bus and headed to Starobeshevo for the filtration process. Upon arrival, we discovered that the filtration process was conducted in a line, with people waiting outside the police station. Nearby was the local school cafeteria, in whose courtyard, as expected, stood a bust of Lenin. The food in the cafeteria was meager but decent, and the overall atmosphere was pleasant. I also enjoyed the village. It was as if you were 10 or 20 years in the past, and yet I liked it there, in its own way, atmospheric, archaic, as if in a world of stop time. I walked around the village for a while, but not for long, as I had to wait for my turn at the police station in real time, and it could happen at any moment, so we decided not to go too far. After that, we almost ran out of the police building and headed towards the orange minibus that was heading to Rostov. The driver was waiting for us, as all the passengers had already passed the infamous filtration. Fortunately, we all had enough space, and everyone fit. I was sitting on some bags behind, and the brothers on the seats. However, we were satisfied because the path to freedom was becoming clearer and clearer. The only thing left to do was to cross the border with the DPR and Rostov. There we should have been waiting for buses from the Ministry of Emergency Situations, which would take all those who wanted to the tent camps for refugees, and from there to a sports complex in Taganrog for temporarily displaced persons like us. First, we passed through double customs, DPR, then Russian, in which we were questioned by not very friendly guys, asking where we were from and where we were going. We did not say that we intended to go to Europe, otherwise it could provoke problems, only invented some legends for the checkers. After passing through the customs, we got on the white Pazas and moved to the city, where the emergency ministry tents were located at the railway station. There, everyone was given a new mobile SIM card and hot food, and then they were put on buses to the sports complex and sent there. Some people got off right there and went their own way. All that happened very quickly, like at a horse race, out in, and so on. There were a lot of people in Taganrog, crowds, endless queues, and buses constantly arriving with new refugees. By the time we got out of our buses and entered the building, more buses had arrived. Then all the new arrivals began to go through the registration process. When it was our turn with our brothers, they asked us where we wanted to go next in order to add us to the list of potential departures, but we said we would be going on our own and didn't need a bus. After that, we were taken to one of the halls of the sports complex, where there were dozens of beds, and as many people, and maybe hundreds. My brothers and I were lucky enough to occupy beds next to each other, so we were together again. But it was clear that we wouldn't be staying here for long, so we had to decide where to go next before heading to Europe. That's why we decided to move to Rostov, to visit a friend of my brother's. We intended to stay at her apartment for a few days, and then go to my friend's place, and from there to Europe. That's what we decided to do. While we were at the camp, I made an agreement with my friends from South Russia that they could shelter us for a few days. Already a day later, the three of us were traveling by train from Taganrog to Rostov, to the acquaintance of the brother. She turned out to be a pretty girl, who had a strange and at the same time funny dog in the apartment. This dog constantly spun around in circles like a malfunctioning helicopter, bumping its head against objects in its path, blurring everything around it uncontrollably, and was very weak, constantly trembling like a maple leaf. In general, a strange specimen, nothing can be said. The girl, her hostess, smoked cigarettes all the time, and showed us good-natured generosity. In general, she warmly and hospitably received us in her house, and she also had a cool son. Thankfully, my younger brother has a wonderful gift, he easily connects with children. I remember how he played and communicated with her son, and I watched and envied him in a good way, as I admired his talent for building relationships with young people. In general, my younger cousin is good at talking to people and is very approachable. The only thing that bothers me about him is that he drinks beer all the time, like a beer factory. He drinks and drinks without stopping. He's a real beer drinker. My older cousin Sasha asked me where I was going, and I told him I was probably going to Holland because he needed to know if he could count on me for the trip, since he was going to Germany and I hadn't decided where I was going yet. My doubts and thoughts were confusing him, and it was obvious that it was difficult to make plans with someone whose statements were constantly changing. But I didn't know where to go at the time, because I didn't have a clear idea of what was best or where to go. I didn't want to stay in Russia, so I had to leave. I had to get out, but where to? I didn't know. And Sonia already had Germany on his mind. He once told me personally, "I'm going to Germany, with or without you, with or without help, but I'm going." And I had no doubt that he would do it, because my brother was a very determined person, and I knew that. Anyway, I decided to go with him and we settled on Holland as our primary destination. But it was necessary to talk to his younger brother, what he thinks. When we voiced our plans to him, he replied that he would not go to Europe, and will stay in Russia, and go to his cousin in another part of the country. So it was decided. That evening, Sasha told me that there were volunteers who could help us get to Europe, pay for our tickets, and create a route for us, and that they could assist us if we reached out to them. I don't know how he found out about them. It seems to be from some chats in the Telegram. I didn't have a smartphone in those days, so it was the brother who acted as an intermediary between the two of us and the outside world. He will find them the next day when we will be on the Rostov-Krasnodar train. Before we left, we said goodbye to my younger brother. He walked us to the train station, stood there, and talked to us, which I remember well. It was a sunny day, and we were surrounded by ugly high-rise buildings and an unfriendly avenue. Sasha and I said goodbye to my younger brother, hugged him, and watched him walk away before heading to the train station. This marked the beginning of our journey together, which would last for 9 days. And here we are in Krasnodar, where we are met by my friend Evgenia, who was with her then boyfriend Maxim. Their attitude to us was very open, kind, friendly, caring. They brought us to the apartment with my friend, also Alexander. They themselves lived next door to him, in the house opposite. We were fed and left in the apartment, and later my friend arrived. He didn't change at all, he was the same nice guy with a pleasant smile and kind eyes. He's an entrepreneur by nature, and I really like him. He hugged us, met my brother, and talked to us about how we survived, how we got out, and where we're going next. We told him that we were going to Europe, and that the volunteers were already buying us tickets and helping us find housing. He was planning to leave too, but he didn't know where or when he would go. Sasha understood everything and wanted to leave Russia because it was becoming dangerous. He, Genya, and Maxim did a lot for us, and it would have been more difficult to carry out our plan without their help. I will always be grateful to them. Wherever you are right now, guys, thank you so much. A few days later, at the appointed time, we sat down at the railway station, and we went from Krasnodar to St. Petersburg. My friend Sasha at the end gave me his own old, but working smartphone, so that I was with messengers. We all embraced together and departed by train to the northern capital, where we were supposed to meet with a volunteer, one friend, and another friend of Dmitri's, whose apartment had been completely destroyed by fire on the left bank of Mariupol. Fortunately, he was alive and well, and he made it to St. Petersburg by another way, not like I did with my cousin, but through minefields in the Zaporizhia region, and further through Crimea. Whatever it was, we all saw each other. The friend who met us at the train station changed our rubles into euros and gave them to us, and even added a little on top. He was a very open and interesting person. I will not forget his nobility. A volunteer was already waiting for us at the train station when we arrived, so we didn't stay to hang out with the guys. We said goodbye to them and almost immediately headed to another part of St. Petersburg to pick up another guy from Mariupol, who was as lost as we were, so that we could leave Russia together. The volunteer turned out to be a nice girl. She bought us something to eat, and was with us as tactfully as possible, did not support the war and showed empathy. In the parking lot, we said goodbye to the guys and went on our way, toward new twists and turns of fate. The third passenger turned out to be a man in his 50s, a musician, with a guitar and long hair. Our fellow countryman. He told us all something about his Mariupol days as a musician, which ended forever, and he was on his way to Latvia. Meanwhile, our younger brother was already on a train to another part of Russia, where he had to travel. It was a 2-day trip, with a layover, so he wasn't bored. Meanwhile, beautiful green fields and cute little houses flashed by the windows of our car. We were on our way to the border, knowing that a new life awaited us. We didn't know what it would be like, but it would be different. Europe was approaching. When we arrived at Ivangorod, we were checked by the border guards without any problems and passed through, and then, the most interesting thing before the exit, waiting and thorough inspection by the special services. The guys in uniform and in civilian clothes talked to each and everyone, and we entered the rooms in groups of several people. I remember they couldn't bring knives, screwdrivers, multi-tools, and the like inside, and I just happened to have a small multi-tool with me, which I simply forgot about. Well, it just slipped my mind. We went to the fingerprinting room, and I remember that I forgot to put it out in front of the entrance. I went back to the entrance and put it on the table, saying that I have memory problems, but the cop told me that I wanted to stab someone with it. I replied that if I wanted to, I certainly wouldn't show it. He didn't say anything to that, and I calmly went back. There wasn't much space in the room where they kept everyone for checks, and it was full of people, mostly fellow countrymen from Donbass. Everyone went through the same procedures, and God forbid if someone laughed or smiled. I remember once I smiled, and immediately heard a nervous question in the hallway, "Why are you smiling? Now you're going to smile at me." This exclamation reminded me of a previous situation when, during the siege of Mariupol, a group of soldiers entered my street while I was walking home. Their commander, with a serious expression on his face, stopped me at my house and asked me without ceremony who I was, where I was from, and why I was walking there. Quite reasonably, I replied that this was my street, I lived here, and I pointed to the house. He said that I was smiling for nothing and he could kick me in the face with a butt. Luckily, this guy didn't disfigure the butt of his precious machine gun on my face. So this young border guard, or rather FSB officer, also behaved extremely aggressively during the inspection, as if I had raped his mother. But, luckily, I was questioned by his colleague, a much busier guy, who asked me just a few questions, like where I was going, filled out my personal data, and told me to wait. I waited with my brother until everything was over. And when it was our turn, everything really went more or less smoothly. We were hardly harassed, there were few idiotic questions, so we can say that we and my brother were lucky. Well, when it was over, they let us out. While waiting for our turn, we were outside and we could see the castle on the opposite bank of the river. It was the city of Narva. When it was over, Sonia and I walked across the bridge to the Estonian border. As we were saying goodbye, we turned around and looked back at the barbed wire fence of Russia. It was the country of the gulags. But we had escaped, and the smell of freedom was intoxicating. It was an unforgettable moment.